The gavel slammed down, echoing like a gunshot in the silent courtroom. "Order!" Judge Harrison bellowed, but the damage was done. Daniel and his mother stood there smirking, thinking they had won. They thought they had stripped his wife of everything: her home, her dignity, her future. They thought she was just a penniless orphan they could toss aside like yesterday's trash. But they forgot one thing: they never actually asked who she really was. When the clerk read her full legal name aloud, the smile wiped off Daniel's face instantly. The color drained from his mother's cheeks. The entire courtroom froze. The hunter had just become the hunted. The rain in Seattle wasn't just rain. It was a freezing sheet of misery that soaked you to the bone in seconds. Nicholas stood on the cobblestones outside the sprawling Blackwood estate, shivering not just from the cold, but from the shock. The heavy oak doors had slammed shut moments ago. The sound still rang in her ears, louder than the thunder rolling overhead. "And don't bother coming back for your trash." Victoria's voice had screeched, sharp and jagged as broken glass. "My son needs a wife who fits his stature, not a charity case we picked up from a diner." Nicholas clutched the single wet cardboard box to her chest. It contained everything she was allowed to take: 2 sweaters, a photograph of her late mother, and her old, beaten-up diary. That was it. 3 years of marriage. 3 years of cooking their meals, cleaning their mansion, nursing Victoria through her hip surgery, and supporting Daniel while he built his tech startup, Nexus Dynamics. It was all gone in an afternoon. Daniel hadn't even looked her in the eye. He stood by the fireplace, swirling a glass of Macallan 18, checking his watch as if her eviction was boring him. "It's just business, Nicholas," he had said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "We have the investors coming from New York next week. The IPO is happening. I need to be seen with someone different. Someone with a lineage. You understand?" "I understand," Nicholas had whispered, though she didn't. She understood cruelty, yes. She understood betrayal. But she didn't understand how the man who once promised her the world while they ate takeout on the floor of a studio apartment could turn into this monster. "The prenup is clear," Victoria had interjected, waving a folder. "You get nothing, no alimony, no assets. You leave with what you came with," which, as I recall, was absolutely nothing. Now, standing in the rain, Nicholas looked up at the window. She saw Daniel's silhouette. He was already on the phone, likely laughing with his business partner, Kyle. They were celebrating. They had trimmed the fat before the big public offering. Nicholas turned away her sneakers, squelching in the mud. She walked toward the iron gates. The security guard, old Mr. Henderson, looked at her with pity as he buzzed the gate open. "I'm sorry, Miss Nicholas," he muttered, looking down. "Mrs. Blackwood ordered me to make sure you were off the premises by 500 p.m. "It's okay, Mr. Henderson," Nicholas said, her voice steady despite the tears mixing with the rain on her cheeks. "You're just doing your job." She walked out onto the dark road. She had no car. Daniel had leased it in the company name and took the keys this morning. She had no credit cards. He had cancelled the supplementary cards an hour ago. She had $40 in cash in her pocket and a dead phone. She walked for 3 miles to the nearest bus stop. As she sat on the cold metal bench, waiting for the number 42 bus that would take her downtown, a black SUV sped past, splashing dirty puddle water all over her jeans. She recognized the license plate, Nexus 1. It was Daniel. He didn't even slow down. Nicholas wiped the mud from her face. A strange calmness began to settle over her, replacing the shock. They thought she was weak. They thought she was just Nicholas, the quiet girl Daniel met at a coffee shop 3 years ago. They thought she had no one. They were wrong. She reached into her wet pocket and pulled out a small silver locket she always wore, tucked under her shirt. She clicked it open. Inside wasn't a picture of Daniel. It was a picture of an older man with stern eyes and a white beard standing in front of a building that looked like a Greek temple. "I tried to do it on my own, Dad," she whispered to the photo. "I tried to be normal. I tried to be loved for me, not the name. But they don't want me. They want a name." She snapped the locket shut. The click was final. "Well," she said to the empty street, "I'll give them a name." The next 3 weeks were a blur of humiliation and survival. Nicholas didn't call home. Not yet. She had too much pride. She found a bed in a women's shelter on the 3rd Avenue, a place that smelled of bleach and despair. She got a job washing dishes at a 24-hour diner near the docks. It was back-breaking work, her hands raw and red from the industrial soap, but it kept her fed. Every night, she would lie on the thin cot in the shelter, listening to the sounds of the city, and check the news on the library computer during the day. Nexus Dynamics, set for record-breaking IPO. Tech mogul. Daniel Blackwood. Spotted with heiress Tiffany St. Cloud. The rise of the Blackwood Empire. He was everywhere, smiling, confident. The Bachelor of the Year. The divorce wasn't even finalized, and he was already parading Tiffany St. Cloud around a woman whose father owned half the shipping docks in Seattle. Victoria must be thrilled. Tiffany was stature. Tiffany was lineage. Then came the subpoena. It was served to her at the diner. A man in a cheap suit slapped the envelope on the counter while she was wiping down a grease stain. Nicholas Blackwood court date. Next Tuesday, 9:00 a.m., Superior Court. Nicholas opened the envelope with trembling hands. It wasn't just a divorce settlement. It was a lawsuit. Plaintiff Daniel Blackwood. Defendant Nicholas Blackwood claims defamation of character, emotional distress, attempted extortion. She read it twice, her breath hitching. They were suing her. "He's claiming you threatened to leak company secrets unless he paid you $5 million, a voice said. Nicholas looked up. A young woman was standing there watching her read. She looked tired, wearing a fraying blazer. "I'm sorry, I couldn't help but see the header," the woman said. "I'm a paralegal. Or, I was, until yesterday." "I never threatened him," Nicholas said, her voice shaking. "I never asked for a dime. I just left." "It's a power move," the woman said, sitting on the stool. "He wants to destroy your credibility before the IPO. If you're painted as a crazy gold-digging extortionist, no one will believe anything you say if you ever decide to speak to the press. It's a preemptive strike. Who is your lawyer?" "I don't have one," Nicholas said. "I have $40. The woman grimaced. "Then you're going to get slaughtered. Daniel Blackwood is represented by Sterling and Crest. They are the Sharks of Seattle. They don't lose." Sterling and Crest. Nicholas froze. The name hit her like a physical blow. "Are you sure?" Nicholas asked, her voice suddenly very quiet. "His lawyer is from Sterling and Crest." "Yeah. James Sterling himself is handling the case. He's the managing partner." "Why?" A strange dry laugh bubbled up in Nicholas's throat. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was the sound of fate clicking into place. "No reason," Nicholas said. She untied her apron. "I need to make a phone call." "You can't use the diner phone for long distance," the manager yelled from the back. "I quit," Nicholas said. She dropped the apron on the counter and walked out. She walked to the payphone on the corner. She hadn't used this number in 5 years. She wasn't even sure if he would pick up. Her fingers trembled as she punched in the area code. 212, New York City. It rang once. Twice, then a gruff, deep voice answered. "This line is private. Who is this?" Nicholas took a deep breath. The rain started to fall again, but this time she didn't feel the cold. "Hello, Arthur," she said. There was a silence on the other end, so profound it felt like the line had gone dead. Then the voice lost its steel edge. It sounded old and incredibly fragile. "Nicholas, is that really you?" "It's me, Dad." 5 years, the man breathed. 5 years and not a word. Your mother. We thought. I know. Nicholas cut him off, tears stinging her eyes. I know. And I'm sorry. I wanted to make it on my own. I wanted to prove I didn't need the money. And did you? I did, Nicholas said, until I met someone who punished me for not having it. The silence on the other end hardened. The fragility was gone, replaced by the tone of a man who crushed corporations for sport. Who? My husband. He's divorcing me. He threw me out on the street. And now he's suing me for extortion. He threw you out. The voice was low, dangerous. My daughter on the street. Yes, but that's not the ironic part, Dad. What is, he's being represented by a firm, Sterling and Crest. On the other end of the line, Arthur let out a short, sharp bark of laughter. It was a terrifying sound. Sterling, he repeated. James Sterling. Yes. I see. Arthur paused. Do you want me to stop it? No. Nicholas said, her eyes narrowing as she watched a billboard of Daniel's smiling face across the street. I don't want you to stop it. I want you to come here. I want you to be there when I walk into that courtroom. But I need you to promise me something. Anything. Don't tell anyone you're coming, and don't tell anyone who I am. Not until the judge asks. Consider it done, Arthur said. I'll have the jet ready in an hour. Nicholas. Yes, Dad. Pack a bag. You're not staying in a shelter tonight. You're staying at the penthouse. I don't have any clothes, Nicholas admitted, looking down at her stained jeans. Don't worry, Arthur said softly. By tomorrow morning, you'll be dressed for war. The Fairmont Olympic Hotel in downtown Seattle was a fortress of luxury. When Nicholas walked in, looking like a drowned rat, the concierge almost stopped her. Then a man in a black suit stepped out of the shadows. He was massive with a scar running down his cheek. Miss Nicholas, the man said, bowing his head. Hello, Marcus, Nicholas said. She recognized her father's head of security immediately. The suite is ready. The stylists are waiting. Nicholas was whisked up the private elevator to the presidential suite. Inside it looked less like a hotel room and more like a staging ground for a military coup. There were racks of clothes, Chanel, Dior, Armani. There were 3 lawyers sitting at a table typing furiously on laptops, and standing by the window looking out over the city was Arthur. He turned. He looked older than she remembered. His hair was completely white now, but the power radiating off him was undiminished. He walked over and pulled her into a hug that knocked the wind out of her. I'm sorry, she sobbed into his expensive suit. I'm so sorry. Hush, he said, stroking her hair. You tried to live a simple life. There is no shame in that. The shame lies with those who mistook your humility for weakness." He pulled back and held her by the shoulders. "Now," he said, his eyes gleaming with a cold fire, "tell me everything. I want to know every insult, every lie, every dollar he took from you." Nicholas told him. She told him about the prenup Victoria had forced her to sign without a lawyer present. She told him about the late nights she spent coding for Daniel's genius algorithm while he slept. She told him about the verbal abuse, the way they mocked her for being an orphan, for being poor. When she finished, the room was silent. The lawyers had stopped typing. Marcus was clenching his fists by the door. Arthur walked over to the table and picked up a file. "He thinks he's about to have an IPO," Arthur said quietly. "He thinks Sterling and Crest is the best legal defense money can buy." Arthur tossed the file back onto the table. "James Sterling is a good lawyer," Arthur admitted, "but he forgets who pays the lease on his building. He forgets who got him his license back after that scandal in '98. Nicholas looked at her father. "Dad, don't destroy the firm. Just help me." "Oh, I won't destroy the firm." Arthur smiled, and it was a shark's smile. "I own the firm, Nicholas. I've been the silent majority partner of Sterling and Crest for 20 years. James Sterling works for me. He just doesn't know that you are my daughter." Nicholas's eyes widened. "Does he know you're coming?" "No. I want to see the look on his face." Arthur checked his watch. "The court hearing is in 2 days. You need to be ready. You're not going in there as Nicholas the waitress. You're going in there as Nicholas. Well, we'll save the name for the right moment." The next 48 hours were a whirlwind. The stylists cut her hair, turning her messy long waves into a sharp, sophisticated bob. They traded her jeans for a tailored Navy power suit that cost more than Daniel's car. They coached her on her posture, her voice, her stare. By Tuesday morning, Nicholas didn't recognize herself in the mirror. The frightened girl from the diner was gone. Staring back was a woman who looked like she could buy the city and burn it down for fun. "Time to go," Arthur said, adjusting his tie. "Are you coming in with me?" "No," Arthur said. "I'll come in last. I want them to underestimate you one last time. I'll be sitting in the back. Just wait for my signal." The black limousine glided through the Seattle streets toward the courthouse. Nicholas's heart was pounding, but her hands were steady. She wasn't Nicholas the victim anymore. She was the storm they never saw coming. The steps of the Superior Court were a frenzy of flashbulbs and microphones. Daniel Blackwood had ensured the press was there. He wanted a public execution. He wanted the world to see Nicholas not as his victim, but as a deranged ex-wife trying to sabotage his glorious rise. He stood near the pillars, looking immaculate in a charcoal bespoke suit, holding hands with Victoria. His mother was wearing a pearl necklace that Nicholas knew cost more than her father's old house. "It's a tragedy, really," Daniel was saying to a reporter from the Seattle Times, putting on a somber face. "We tried to help her. We took her in when she had nothing. But mental instability is a difficult thing to manage. The threats, the extortion. I had to protect my company. I had to protect my investors." "She demanded $5 million, the reporter asked, scribbling furiously. $5 million, Victoria chimed in, clutching her chest theatrically. "Can you imagine, after we gave her a roof over her head? She's a grifter, pure and simple." The crowd murmured. Public opinion was already shifting. To them, Daniel was the handsome, successful genius, and Nicholas was the bitter, greedy leech. Just then, the hum of engines drowned out the reporter's questions. It wasn't a taxi. It wasn't a bus. A convoy of 3 black Escalades with tinted windows rolled up to the curb, moving with the precision of a presidential motorcade. The lead car stopped right in front of the press pit. Two large men in earpieces hopped out of the front seat and scanned the crowd with professional menace. "Who is this?" Daniel whispered to Victoria, frowning. "Is the mayor here?" The security guard opened the back door of the middle vehicle. First, a pair of red-bottomed Christian Louboutin stilettos hit the pavement. Then Nicholas stepped out. The silence that fell over the crowd was instant and absolute. Gone was the frizzy hair tied back in a messy bun. Her hair was now a sleek, sharp bob that framed her face like a helmet of war. Gone were the oversized hoodies and jeans. She was wearing a structured navy blue Alexander McQueen suit that screamed power. A diamond tennis bracelet glinted on her wrist, subtle but large enough to buy a small island. She didn't look at the ground. She didn't look at the cameras. She looked straight ahead, wearing oversized sunglasses. Is that the wife?" a photographer whispered. "No way." Another muttered. "That looks like royalty." Daniel's mouth hung open. He blinked, trying to reconcile this vision with the woman he had kicked out into the rain 3 weeks ago. "Victoria," Daniel hissed. "Where did she get those clothes? Did she steal my credit cards before she left?" "Impossible!" Victoria snapped, though her eyes darted nervously. "I cancelled everything. It's probably a rental. Or a fake. Look at her strutting around like she belongs here. It's pathetic." Nicholas walked up the stairs. As she passed Daniel, she stopped. She didn't turn her head, but she lowered her sunglasses just an inch, looking him dead in the eye over the rim. "Hello, Daniel," she said. Her voice wasn't the soft, apologetic whisper he was used to. It was cool, smooth, and utterly indifferent. "You look expensive," Daniel scoffed, trying to regain his composure. "Spend the settlement money before you even got it. Bold move." "I haven't spent a dime of your money, Daniel," Nicholas said, a small, dangerous smile playing on her lips. "And I never will. I prefer clean money." She kept walking. The heavy doors swallowed her up, leaving Daniel standing there, a strange knot of unease tightening in his stomach. "Don't let her rattle you," Victoria said, gripping his arm. "James Sterling is inside. She's walking into a slaughterhouse dressed in a costume. That's all." Daniel nodded, straightening his tie. "Right. She's bluffing. Let's go finish this." The courtroom was packed. Every seat was taken by reporters, curious onlookers, and investors in Nexus Dynamics, who wanted to ensure the scandal was put to bed before the IPO. Judge Harrison, a stern man known for his dislike of courtroom theatrics, banged his gavel. "Case number 49202, the bailiff announced. Blackwood v. Blackwood. Defamation and attempted extortion." James Sterling stood up. He was a man who looked like he had been manufactured in a boardroom, perfect tan silver hair and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He was the most feared divorce attorney on the West Coast. "Your Honor," Sterling began, his voice booming, "we are here today to put an end to a malicious campaign of harassment. The defendant, Miss Nicholas," he paused, looking at his notes with a sneer, "Ms. Nicholas Doe effectively has attempted to blackmail my client, a pillar of the tech community, simply because she could not accept that her free ride was over." Sterling paced in front of the judge, gesturing at Daniel, who looked the picture of the aggrieved victim. "She has no assets. She has no lineage. She has no employment. She married my client for his potential, and when she couldn't keep up with his success, she decided to steal it. We are asking for a full restraining order and damages set at $5 million. Nicholas sat at the defense table, alone. There was no lawyer next to her. She sat perfectly still, her hands folded on the mahogany table. Judge Harrison looked over his spectacles at her. "Ms. Blackwood," the judge said, "where is your counsel?" Nicholas stood up. The movement was graceful, fluid. "I am representing myself today, Your Honor." James Sterling chuckled audibly. A ripple of laughter went through the gallery. Representing yourself against Sterling and Crest was legal suicide. "Very well." Judge Harrison sighed, clearly annoyed. "Do you wish to make an opening statement?" "I do," Nicholas said. She walked to the center of the room. She didn't pace like Sterling. She stood rooted to the spot, radiating a calm that made the room grow quiet. "Mr. Sterling speaks of lineage and assets," Nicholas began, her voice clear and carrying to the back of the room without a microphone. "He speaks of me as if I am a parasite. He claims I threatened my husband for money." She turned to look at Daniel. "I don't need Daniel's money," she said simply. "I never did. I cooked his meals and cleaned his home because I loved him. I signed his prenup because I didn't care about his wealth. I supported him because I believed in him. But he didn't believe in me. He believed in a name. He wanted a wife with a legacy." She turned back to the judge. "So today I would like to correct the record. The plaintiff has filed this lawsuit against Nicholas Blackwood, but that is not my name. My divorce papers were filed yesterday, reverting me to my maiden name. If we are to proceed, I ask that the court address me correctly." Judge Harrison frowned. "This is highly irregular, but—" "Fine. Clerk, please update the record. What is your legal maiden name?" Nicholas took a breath. She looked at James Sterling, who was checking his watch, looking bored. Then she looked at the back of the room, where an older man with white hair had just slipped in and sat on the back bench. "My name," she said, "is Nicholas Kensington." For a second, nothing happened. The air conditioner hummed. Then James Sterling dropped his pen. It clattered loudly on the floor. The color drained from his face so fast, he looked like he was about to faint. He whipped his head around, staring at her with wide, terrified eyes. "Kensington," the judge repeated, pausing as he wrote it down. Then the judge froze too. He looked up, his eyes narrowing. "Wait. As in, the Kensington Group?" "Yes, Your Honor," Nicholas said, softly. "My father is Arthur Kensington." A collective gasp sucked the air out of the room. It wasn't just a gasp, it was a shockwave. The Kensington Group wasn't just a company. It was an empire. They owned the bank that was underwriting Daniel's IPO. They owned the building this court was sitting in. And most importantly, Arthur Kensington was the silent majority shareholder of Sterling and Crest. Daniel blinked, confused. "What? Who cares? Who is Arthur Kensington?" Victoria grabbed his arm, her fingernails digging into his flesh. Her face was a mask of pure horror. "You idiot!" she hissed, her voice trembling. "Kensington owns the city. He owns everything." James Sterling was shaking. He looked from Nicholas to the back of the room. He saw the white-haired man sitting there. The man gave a small, grim nod. Sterling felt his knees turn to water. He had just spent 10 minutes calling his boss's daughter a penniless gold digger in open court. His career was over. I... Sterling stammered, loosening his tie. "Your Honor, I may need a recess." "No recess," Nicholas said, her voice cutting like a whip. "You wanted to talk about lineage, Mr. Sterling. You wanted to talk about net worth. My trust fund generates more interest in a day than Nexus Dynamics makes in a year. If I wanted to destroy Daniel, I wouldn't blackmail him for $5 million. She took a step closer to Daniel, who was now shrinking in his seat. I would just buy his company and fire him. The courtroom erupted. Reporters were shouting into their phones. Flashbulbs were going off through the windows. Daniel stared at her, his world collapsing. The woman he had mocked for being poor, the woman he had treated like a servant, was practically American royalty. Order! Judge Harrison banged his gavel furiously. Order in this court! But the order was gone. The predator had just realized he was locked in a cool with a lion. Nicholas turned to the judge. Your Honor, I have evidence that the extortion claims were fabricated by Mr. Blackwood and his mother to manipulate his stock price. And since my father's forensic accountants have been looking into Nexus dynamics for the last 24 hours, I think the court might be interested in what they found regarding tax fraud. Daniel's face went grey. The tables hadn't just turned. They had been overturned and set on fire. The silence that followed Nicholas's revelation was heavy, suffocating, and absolute. It was the kind of silence that precedes a natural disaster, the moment the water recedes before the tsunami hits. James Sterling, the man who had built a career on intimidation and impeccable suits, looked as though he had been struck by lightning. He stared at the back of the courtroom, at the white-haired man, sitting calmly on the wooden bench. Arthur Kensington didn't smile. He didn't frown. He simply tapped his index finger against his watch. Tick, tick, tick. Then the sound broke. It started with a single vibration on a wooden table. Then a chime. Then a ringtone. Within 10 seconds, the courtroom was alive with a cacophony of digital noise. Every reporter's phone, every tablet, every smartwatch in the gallery began to buzz and beep simultaneously. "Odorokoniasu," Judge Harrison bellowed, banging his gavel. "Turn off those devices immediately." But nobody listened to the judge. The reporters were looking at their screens, their eyes widening in collective disbelief. "It's trending." A journalist from the front row whispered, his voice carrying in the sudden lull. "It's everywhere. Kensington Group freezes credit lines for Nexus Dynamics. TC launches probe into pre-IPO irregularities." Daniel Blackwood stood up, his face a mask of confusion. What are they talking about? That's impossible." "Sit down, you fool," Victoria hissed, grabbing the back of his jacket. But her hands were shaking so violently, she couldn't get a grip. Nicholas didn't look at the phones. She walked back to her defense table, her movements deliberate and calm. She picked up a thick, leather-bound folder that had been sitting there the entire time. She unzipped it. The sound of the zipper was sharp, like a sword being drawn from a sheath. "Your Honor," Nicholas said, her voice cutting through the din, "the phones are buzzing because my father's auditors have just released their findings to the Securities and Exchange Commission. You see, when Daniel filed for this divorce, he claimed that Nexus Dynamics was his sole intellectual property. He claimed I was nothing more than a domestic burden." She pulled out a stack of documents flagged with neon sticky notes and walked toward the bench. But Daniel made a critical error. He forgot who built the system he's trying to sell. James Sterling seemed to wake from his trance. He stepped forward, but his voice lacked its usual thunder. "Objection, Your Honor. This is ambush litigation. These documents haven't been entered into discovery." "These aren't legal arguments, Mr. Sterling," Nicholas replied, turning to look him in the eye. "These are server logs. They are public record if you know where to look." She handed the file to the bailiff, who passed it to the judge. "Exhibit A," Nicholas announced, turning to the gallery. The commit logs for the Nexus core algorithm. Daniel claims he wrote the code. But if you look at the timestamps, 90% of the code was committed between the hours of 100 a.m. and 400 a.m. from a terminal with the user ID cbdev. Daniel's face went past pale. It turned a sickly shade of grey. cbdev stands for Nicholas Blackwood, she continued. I wrote the code, Your Honor. I wrote it at night after I finished cleaning the house and nursing my mother-in-law, because Daniel couldn't figure out how to resolve the syntax errors in the database. He isn't a coding genius. He doesn't even know how to write a basic Python script. Liar! Daniel screamed, slamming his fist on the table. She's lying. I'm the CEO. It's my company. Then explain the encryption key. Nicholas shot back, her voice rising for the first time. If it's your code, Daniel, tell the court the root encryption key for the database. Right now. The room went deadly quiet. Daniel opened his mouth. He stammered. He looked at his mother. He looked at his lawyer. Sweat beaded on his forehead. I don't have to answer that, he muttered. He doesn't know it, Nicholas said coldly, because I never gave it to him. Judge Harrison looked up from the documents, his expression darkening. Mr. Sterling, your client is looking perilously close to perjury. We're not done, Your Honor, Nicholas said. That was just the intellectual property theft. Now let's discuss the fraud. She pointed to the second section of the folder. When I realized Daniel was divorcing me to impress his investors, I asked my father's team to look into the company finances. We found that Nexus Dynamics has been bleeding money for 2 years, but the books looked clean. Why? She pulled out a flowchart that looked like a spider web. Because Daniel was funneling investor capital into offshore shell companies to inflate the revenue numbers. He was moving money out, washing it through a company in the Cayman Islands called Veritas Holdings, and then moving it back in as sales revenue. Nicholas turned her gaze to Victoria Blackwood. The older woman was shrinking into her fur coat, looking like a trapped animal. And who is the sole signatory for Veritas Holdings? Nicholas asked. She didn't wait for an answer. It's Victoria Blackwood. The gasp that went through the courtroom sucked the oxygen out of the air. Victoria let out a strangled shriek. She jumped to her feet, clutching her pearl necklace as if it were choking her. No. That's a lie. Victoria screamed, her voice shrill and breaking. She pointed a trembling finger at her son. He made me do it. I didn't know what I was signing. He told me it was for tax efficiency. He told me it was legal. Mother. Daniel looked at her, his eyes wide with betrayal. You came up with the idea. You said we needed to hide the assets in case Nicholas tried to take half. I am an old woman, Victoria wailed, playing to the cameras, tears streaming down her face. I don't understand finance. My son used me. He manipulated me just like he manipulated that poor girl. I am a victim here. You're not a victim, Victoria, Nicholas said, her voice disgusted. You're an accomplice, and the wire transfers authorized by your signature are all there. It was total chaos. The press was shouting questions. Daniel and Victoria were screaming at each other. The bailiffs were moving in. James Sterling stood up. He buttoned his jacket with trembling hands. He looked at the chaos at the defense table, the mother turning on the son, the empire crumbling in real time, and he made a decision. Your Honor, Sterling shouted over the noise. Mr. Sterling, control your clients, Judge Harrison roared. I cannot, Your Honor, Sterling replied. In light of the evidence presented regarding active criminal fraud and money laundering, and given that my retainer was likely paid with stolen funds, I am formally withdrawing as counsel for Mr. Blackwood, effective immediately." "You can't withdraw." Daniel grabbed Sterling's arm, his eyes wild. "I paid you a fortune. You have to fix this." Sterling ripped his arm away with a look of pure revulsion. "I defend criminals, Daniel, not idiots who try to defraud Arthur Kensington's daughter. You're on your own." Sterling didn't even pack his briefcase. He turned and marched out of the courtroom, pushing through the reporters, leaving Daniel standing alone at the table. "Mr. Blackwood," Judge Harrison said. The judge's voice was low, dangerous, and final. "It appears this is no longer a civil matter." The doors at the back of the courtroom swung open. 4 men in windbreakers, marked federal agents, walked in. They had been waiting in the hall. Daniel froze. He looked at the agents, then at the judge, and finally at Nicholas. The arrogance was gone. The tech mogul persona had dissolved. He was just a terrified man who had overplayed his hand. "Nicholas," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Nicholas, please. Stop them. Tell them it was a mistake. We can work this out." I can explain." "There's nothing to explain, Daniel," Nicholas said. She stood only a few feet away from him, unmovable. "You wanted a wife with a name. You got one. The Kensington name demands truth. And this is the truth. I love you," Daniel blurted out, desperation making him pathetic. "I always loved you. It was just business. Please, baby, call your dad off." Nicholas looked at him. She searched her heart for any flicker of emotion, anger, sadness, pity. But there was nothing. He was a stranger to her now. "You didn't love me," she said softly. "You loved that I made you feel big. But you're small, Daniel. You're so small." "Mr. Blackwood," the lead agent said, stepping up behind him. "Place your hands behind your back." As the handcuffs clicked a sharp metallic sound that echoed in the silent room, Daniel began to sob. It was an ugly, broken sound. "And Mrs. Blackwood," the judge called out as Victoria tried to sneak toward the exit. "I didn't do anything," Victoria cried, backing away. "The agents have a warrant for Veritas Holdings as well," the judge said dryly. "Take a seat, madam." Victoria collapsed onto the bench, burying her face in her hands as the second pair of agents approached her. Nicholas turned her back on the wreckage. She didn't stay to watch them be dragged out. She didn't need to. She walked toward the back of the courtroom. The sea of reporters parted for her cameras, flashing blindingly bright. She didn't shield her eyes. She walked with her head high. Arthur Kensington stood up as she approached. He looked at his daughter, not the scared girl who had run away 5 years ago, but the warrior who had just reclaimed her life. "Ready to go?" he asked, offering her his arm. "Yes, Dad," Nicholas said, taking it. "I'm ready." They walked out together, leaving the chaos, the flashing lights, and the Blackwood family behind them, trapped in the ruins of their own greed. The heavy courtroom doors swung shut, sealing the past away forever. 6 months later. The rain in Seattle was usually a depressing grey curtain that dampened the spirit, but today from the 42nd floor of the Phoenix Tower, it looked like a cleansing wash. It battered against the floor-to-ceiling glass, but inside the air was warm, scented with fresh espresso and the hum of productivity. Nicholas sat in the corner office, the same office that had once belonged to Daniel. But everything about it had changed. The cold, sterile chrome and black leather furniture that Daniel loved was gone, replaced by warm oak cream-colored wool rugs and vibrant art. The name on the wall outside didn't say Nexus Dynamics anymore. It read Phoenix Code. She wasn't just the owner. She was the CEO, and she was tired. It was a good kind of tired, though. The kind that came from rebuilding a broken engine into a race car. After the scandal, the Department of Justice had seized Daniel's assets. The fire sale was legendary. Nicholas, using the Kensington Trust, had bought the intellectual property, her own code, for pennies on the dollar. She had rehired the engineering team Daniel had fired for budget cuts, giving them raises and equity stakes. The company wasn't just surviving, it was thriving. And this time, the success was built on solid code, not smoke and mirrors. Nicholas spun her chair around to look at the city below. She took a sip of her tea, savoring the silence. "Ms. Kensington." The intercom buzzed, breaking her reverie. It was Joseph, her executive assistant, a bright young woman Nicholas had promoted from the mailroom, recognizing a sharp mind that others had ignored. "Yes, Joseph. I'm sorry to disturb you, ma'am, but there's a situation in the lobby." Nicholas frowned, leaning forward. "What kind of situation? Is it the press again?" "No, ma'am. It's a man. Security was about to remove him. He's causing a bit of a scene, demanding to see the owner. He looks homeless, frankly. But he insists he knows you. He says his name is Dan." Nicholas's hand froze around her ceramic mug. The name hung in the air, heavy and suffused with a history she thought she had buried. Dan. Not Daniel. He only used Dan when he was trying to be charming or when he was desperate. "Let him up," Nicholas said, her voice steady, though her heart gave a single, hard thump against her ribs. "Are you sure, Ms. Kensington?" Joseph sounded hesitant. He's in pretty bad shape. I can have security escort him out immediately." "No," Nicholas said, standing up and smoothing down her cream cashmere skirt. "Send him up, and tell security to wait by the elevators, just in case." The 5 minutes it took for the elevator to ascend felt like hours. Nicholas walked to the window, watching the rain streak the glass. She remembered standing on the other side of those gates, shivering, clutching a cardboard box, while Daniel sipped whiskey and laughed. She remembered the feeling of being discarded like trash. The heavy oak doors creaked open. Nicholas turned slowly. The man standing in the doorway was a ghost. Daniel Blackwood, once the Bachelor of the Year, once the golden boy of Seattle Tech, looked like a spectre haunting his own life. He had lost at least 30 pounds. His face, once full and arrogant, was gaunt and grey, covered in a patchy, unkempt beard. He wasn't wearing his bespoke Italian suits anymore. He was wearing a cheap synthetic windbreaker that was dripping wet and a pair of faded trousers that were frayed at the hems. He held a plastic bag in one hand. He stood there, water dripping from his nose onto the plush carpet, staring at Nicholas. She looked radiant, glowing with health and power, framed by the city skyline. "Nicholas," he croaked. His voice was rough, like he hadn't spoken to anyone in days. "Hello, Daniel," she said. She didn't invite him to sit. She didn't smile. She stood behind her massive mahogany desk, using it as a fortress. Daniel took a hesitant step forward, his eyes darting around the room. He looked at the art, the furniture, the busy hum of the servers in the next room. He looked at the life he had thrown away. I saw the news," Daniel stammered, wringing the plastic bag in his hands. "About the relaunch. Phoenix Code. Clever name." "It seemed appropriate," Nicholas said coolly, "considering I had to raise it from the ashes you left behind." Daniel flinched, as if she had slapped him. He shuffled closer, trying to summon a ghost of his old charm, a smile that used to dazzle investors. Now it just looked predatory and sad. Look, Nicholas, I know I messed up. I know that. I was under a lot of pressure. My mother, the investors, you know how it is. I know exactly how it is, Daniel, she cut him off. I was the one doing the work while you were handling the pressure by buying sports cars. I know, Daniel said, his voice rising in desperation. And I paid for it. I lost everything, Nicholas. Everything. The feds took the house, the cars, the accounts. Mom is in a state facility. She had a breakdown when they seized her jewelry. I'm sleeping on a couch in a basement in Tacoma, and the guy is kicking me out tomorrow because I can't pay the $50 for rent. He reached the edge of the desk. The smell hit her. Then the smell of stale rain, old sweat and desperation. I'm facing sentencing next month, he whispered, tears welling in his red-rimmed eyes. My public defender says I'll get 3 to 5 years for fraud. But right now I'm starving, Nicholas. I haven't eaten a real meal in 2 days. Nicholas looked at him. She looked for the man she had loved for 3 years. She looked for the husband who had promised to protect her. But he wasn't there. He had never been there. There was only this hollow shell of a man who measured his worth by his bank account, and now that the account was empty, he was nothing. Why are you here, Daniel? She asked softly. He wiped his nose with his sleeve. I was hoping, since you own the company now, and since you know I can sell, maybe there's a job. Anything. I don't care. Janitor, mailroom, sales. I just need a paycheck. I need a chance to get back on my feet before I go to prison. Please, for old time's sake, for the love we had. Nicholas stared at him. The audacity was breathtaking. He had thrown her out into the rain with nothing sued her for. Millions tried to destroy her reputation, and now he was invoking the love we had to get a paycheck. She slowly opened the top drawer of her desk. Daniel's eyes lit up. He saw the movement. He thought she was reaching for a checkbook. He thought he had won. The relief that washed over his face was pathetic. Thank you, he breathed, stepping closer. Thank you, Nicholas. I knew you still cared. I knew you wouldn't just leave me to drown. Nicholas pulled her hand out. She wasn't holding a checkbook. She wasn't holding cash. She was holding a small white business card. She slid it across the polished mahogany surface. It stopped right at the edge, directly in front of him. Daniel looked down at it, confused. He picked it up with trembling fingers. Is this the contact for HR? He asked, looking up hopefully. No, Nicholas said. Her voice was devoid of malice, but it was colder than the rain outside. Read it. Daniel squinted at the card. St. Jude's Shelter for the Destitute, 1402 3rd Avenue, Seattle, WA Soup Kitchen. Hours 6:00 p.m., 8:00 p.m. Daniel went still. He read it again, his lips moving silently. The color drained from his already pale face. Nicholas, he choked out. What is this? That, Nicholas said, leaning back in her chair, is the address of the shelter where I slept the night you kicked me out of our home. The bed isn't comfortable, and it smells like bleach, but the soup is warm. If you leave now and catch the number 42 bus, you can make the line before it closes. Daniel stared at her, his mouth opening and closing. The cruelty of it, the poetic absolute justice of it, seemed to crush the air out of his lungs. You can't be serious, he whispered. "You're a billionaire. Your father is Arthur Kensington. You could write me a check for $10,000 and not even notice it. You can't send me to a shelter." "You sent me there," Nicholas replied, her eyes hard as diamonds. "And I had nothing. No name, no connections, just a box of clothes. And I survived. I rose." She stood up, signaling the end of the meeting, the end of the chapter. "You said you were a self-made man, Daniel. You told the magazines you built this company from nothing. Well, here is your chance. Start with nothing. Start where I started. If you are truly the genius you claimed to be, you won't need my charity. You'll figure it out." She pressed the intercom button. "Joseph, Mr. Blackwood is leaving now. Please have security escort him out." "Nicholas!" Daniel shouted, lunging forward. "Don't do this! I'm your husband. I was your husband." Two large security guards in dark suits appeared at the door, instantly grabbing Daniel by the arms. "I was your wife," Nicholas shouted back, her voice finally cracking with the weight of the memory. "And you treated me like an employee you were firing. You didn't see a person, Daniel. You saw a liability. Well, now you're the liability." "Get off me!" Daniel screamed as the guards dragged him backward. He scrabbled at the doorframe, his fingernails leaving marks. "Nicholas, please, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Goodbye, Daniel." Nicholas turned her chair around, facing the window. She heard his screams fade down the hallway. She heard the ding of the elevator. And then finally, silence. She looked down at the street 42 stories below. A few minutes later, a small figure emerged from the building, huddled against the wind. He stood there for a moment, looking up at the towering skyscraper rain, soaking him to the bone. He looked small, insignificant. Nicholas watched him turn and walk toward the bus stop. His head hung low. She took a deep, shuddering breath. She waited for the guilt to come. She waited to feel bad for the man who had once held her hand. But the guilt didn't come. Instead, she felt a lightness she hadn't felt in years. The final tether had been cut. The phone on her desk rang. She picked it up. "Hey, kiddo." Arthur's voice came through warm and grounding. "I'm downstairs. Driver's ready. Are we celebrating the quarterly earnings tonight?" Nicholas smiled, wiping a single tear from her cheek. "We're celebrating more than that. Dad," she said softly, "we're celebrating freedom." "I like the sound of that," Arthur said. "I'll see you in 5 minutes." Nicholas hung up. She grabbed her purse, took one last look at the empty chair where Daniel had tried to beg for a shortcut, and switched off the lights. The office went dark, but outside the city lights were just beginning to sparkle, brighter than they had ever been before. And that is the story of how Nicholas Kensington went from a discarded wife to the owner of the empire that tried to destroy her. It's a powerful reminder that you should never judge someone by their current circumstances, because you never know who they really are or who their father might be. Daniel learned the hard way that when you marry for status instead of love, you might just end up losing both. If you enjoyed this story of ultimate karma, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. And let me know in the comments. Do you think Nicholas was too harsh on Daniel at the end, or did he get exactly what he deserved? I'll see you in the next video.